Bioshock is the classic first-person shooter that was released in the magical year of 2007. Developed by 2K Boston and 2K Australia, both formerly known as, and then renamed to, Irrational Games. Irrational Games developed such masterpieces such as SWAT 4 and Freedom Force vs. the Third Reich. Bioshock is a game beloved by critics and players for its atmospheric setting, unique world, and interesting story. It won multiple Game of the Year awards and is considered one of the best games of all time. You could literally Google that, and on Wikipedia it'll have a list, and Bioshock will be right there. Blew my mind. Thinking about all this, I had one question. Is Bioshock really that amazing? The way some people talk about this game, you would think it's like perfect, but nothing is perfect. No game, movie, show, or book is truly perfect. So I decided to sit down and replay Bioshock and rate it on 3 merits: gameplay, level design, and the story, to see if this game truly holds up to all of its praise. So Bioshock's gameplay is sort of a mixed bag. There are elements to love, and there are elements that are either to be hated or just boring. So let's just kind of start with the most important thing for most of these games, the combat. So the combat early on in the game sucks, because melee isn't really that much viable at that point, and you only have one plasmid ability in the electric. And once you get your first pistol, it kind of gets better, but you don't have a lot of ammo, so you're still really stuck with using this wrench. And it doesn't do a lot of damage to a good chunk of the enemies because they're a bit beefy. Really, the first level is not a good way to really introduce your gameplay mechanics. Story-wise, the beginning is great. But anyways, combat gets really good when you start getting more weapons and you start going really deep into the plasmids and tonics. So I'm going to start with the gunplay of the game, which is kind of the first-person shooter element of it. It's kind of weak, which is to be expected for games of that era. The early to late 2000s era of first-person shooters went through a lot of like evolution to what we have today. So it is not up to par standard of like the shooting we feel in a lot of games today. It doesn't feel good or bad particularly. It's just very much kind of like in the middle. Though to kind of make up for that are 2 things. The plasmid system, which I love. It might be one of the best elements for combat in this game. It does kind of suck that they aren't really the most viable option for killing enemies. They're more of like a 1-2, like you'll use a plasmid and then you'll switch to a gun or your wrench and finish the enemy off. It'd be really cool if plasmids were more of a alternative to guns, but it's fine as it is. Tonics are great buffs for character builds, I guess, in a sense. Like, you want your character to be more of a tank, more of a shooter. You want him to be more focused on hacking and stuff like that. Tonics are great, though they're not really a selling point for the game, and sometimes you kind of forget that they're a thing until you find another one just out in the world. The worst addition to the game is the fucking pipes minigame for hacking. It's like you gotta hack to kind of get through the game, in a sense, for like more, so you're getting more bang for your buck from like the vendors or healing things and whatever, or like to hack into certain bot-based enemies, and you're just like, God, fuck this thing. And I've noticed I didn't really take a lot of the hacking tonics, but so this might be affected by that, just so you know. But hacking sometimes is impossible to complete because they have the security alarm things and the overload things, pipes. And if you hit one of those through your pipe, it's going to activate it. And I've had a lot of points much later in the game where I'm hacking something and there was no way to get to the end because of where those were placed. Like, there was like one point where it was just a straight bar cutting off the bottom half of the map, for the hacking thing, and I just couldn't get to it, and that sucked. Kind of pissed me off, and it just becomes like, oh, is it really worth hacking this thing? And then you just end up using so many hacking tools because you just hate the hacking minigame. I wish you could carry more hacking tools. Hacking tools became one of my favorite items to use, and I was always running out because I used them so much. All in all, hacking is useful, but the minigame for it sucks, so it kind of like is a deterrent for certain players who don't want to deal with that fucking bullshit to just hack into something. They might just be like, well, if I don't have a hacking tool, I'd rather just fucking spend the extra $5 that I would have saved on this ammo or healing kit. Another mechanic that wasn't particularly bad or frustrating is just kind of like, why does it exist? Is the research mechanic. It really doesn't add much to the game. It makes enemies easier, and it's a great way to get like certain tonics and the Big Daddy control plasmid, or like character upgrades and health and damage and Eve and all that. But overall, you can really do with or without it in the game. It just, like, I felt like there were just so many points where I'm like, I need to up my damage or something against this type of enemy, so I gotta take a bunch of pictures of it in the middle of this fight. So I'm gonna be running around snapping pictures, and it just was really boring. The enemies in the game, I really liked the how there was a variance to splicers, but they kind of got boring after a while, because very much like the first half of the game, there isn't really much danger to them. Like, outside of when you're just running around with your wrench, they don't feel that great to fight later on when you become like this very powerful being that's shooting thunder out of his fingers and lighting people on fire. And they do, near the end of the game, get plasmid abilities and all that to kind of counter yours, but there isn't much variation to it. Like, it'd be cool if like you go into an encounter and one of the guys had the Inferno plasmid, one had the lightning one, and one had the beast swarm, so you had to work around that, and you're like, well, I should use ice in this one and blast them with the shotgun or blah blah blah. It just kind of got like, oh, okay, splicers are just the same thing. Like, they got maybe one weapon upgrade throughout the game. Like, the leadhead ones, instead of using pistols, started using the machine gun, and the thuggish splicers started having the electric plasmid. But again, that was like later in the game, and like Big Daddy's just armor got a little tougher, but really no variation in their combat style or anything. Big Daddies are great. They operate as a terrifying presence very much early on in the game. And later on, they're still, a tough enemy, but you can handle them. So you feel yourself getting more powerful through fighting of the Big Daddies. I do like that they are non-aggressive towards you within reason. So like if you shoot them, they're going to attack you. Or they feel like you're getting too close to one of the little sisters, they might become aggressive to you, but if you were to leave the little sister alone and walk away, it won't come chasing after you. So I really, really like that. I also like that there were kind of like multiple variants of the Big Daddies. The more so the Rosie and the Bouncer. I was a little disappointed that the Rosie and the Bouncer wouldn't appear on the same level together, and you would just go into a level and you're like, which one am I dealing with? The Rosies, so they're going to shoot at me, or am I going to be dealing with the Bouncers, so they're going to be slapping me around? It's not the biggest detractor for, the Big Daddies. I just really wish that I could encounter a Rosie and a Bouncer like at the same time, and that would introduce like an interesting cat and mouse trying to get away from them stuff. But again, I really like the Big Daddies. They're fun. They're a lot of fun to fight, and they're a lot of fun to encounter. The Little Sisters are also a great morality mechanic, because in a sense, if you save the Little Sisters, you get the best ending, but you're a little underpowered throughout the whole game. You can't get every ability. You gotta sacrifice some to get the ones you really want. And I like that, because if you were to harvest them, you can get very, very powerful, especially early on, but you're getting kind of like one of the worst endings to the game, where you're just a douchebag. The Big Daddies and Little Sisters, great addition to the game. Boss fights, there aren't really a lot. I guess one per level, which makes sense. But really, the bosses were just much spongier variants of enemies. Like, even the final boss is just kind of just a spongier Big Daddy. The boss fights are kind of easy, really. Like, I never struggled in a boss fight. Especially the final boss, it's really easy. Overall, I do think the gameplay is okay. It doesn't hold up to modern standards, but for the time, it's pretty good, and I did have fun with the plasmids and the strategic approaches to combat with the security system and environmental things that you could use on plasmids, which I didn't really bring up, but it's like one of the first things you learn. You know, you can shock the water or whatever. So overall, gameplay, it's okay. Honestly, I think the level design is the strongest point for Bioshock. Like, it just is an amazing looking world. The levels are really laid out pretty well, not confusing. You're rewarded quite heavily, I'd say, for exploring. And honestly, the atmosphere is great. Every little bit of detail they could put into this underwater city, they did. There's a reason why Rapture is so iconic. It really stands out from a lot of similar type of games, because most of them are either set in space or in the sky or whatever, and those are good games. But Rapture is just very memorable for how unique of a location it is. So there really isn't much else to say. I mean, again, the level layouts are great. It's impossible to get lost because they're very well laid out. You're rewarded for exploring. I can't say it enough. The atmosphere is amazing. Nothing else I can say can really add to how much I really love the level design of this game. Bioshock's story is a mixed bag for me. It's got a lot of cool and unique ideas, but also some boring by-the-numbers story beats. The story is mostly told through audio logs and characters talking to you through a radio, so you never really have that connection to anyone or the overall story. Like, the most memorable characters I feel like in the game are Andrew Ryan and Tenenbaum, because those are the ones you really have a face-to-face with. And I really do love the backstory for Bioshock, you know, of Rapture before its fall, you know, leading up to its civil war. It really is kind of like interesting finding these audio logs, learning about what the world was like, or the city to be specific was like before it kind of started to fall apart. And you can kind of see, like, through the way these people are talking, like threads are being pulled early on, kind of like pulling, and people are just tugging and pulling, and everything is slowly reaching to this final moment where it just breaks out into civil war, and people are dying, and children are being taken and sort of enslaved and brainwashed, and, you know, all this stuff. It really is, like, the strongest aspect is the backstory and not, like, the main story you're following through the character you're playing as. The story kind of lacks, in a sense, outside of, like, the really interesting political dynamic you're learning of this kind of struggle for control of Rapture between Andrew Ryan, the man who created this place and is kind of like its god, and Frank Fontaine, who is kind of like this greedy con man who wants to just rule over this place and just get really rich quick. Both kind of like a clash of ideas in a sense, because for all of his faults, Andrew Ryan wanted to make a place where the innovators, artists, and anything wouldn't be held back. And although morals were very corrupt in Rapture, he had at least, like, a sense of, like, worth with this stuff. So you kind of feel for Andrew Ryan, but you never really get a picture of who Frank Fontaine is until later in the game, when you find out that he was Atlas all along. And he just talks to you and is like, yeah, I just wanted to take over Rapture so I could get rich. Like, you listen to some audio logs where they talk about Frank Fontaine, but you'd never get a feel for the character. So, hey, it's kind of like the worst final boss. And where can I go talking about the story without talking about the very memorable "Would you kindly" moment, where throughout the game you are told, would you kindly do this, that, and you find out that it was a brainwashing, mechanism that Frank Fontaine had instilled into you as a baby, so that you would come here in the future and kill Andrew Ryan for him. Kind of like an assassin he's been prepping for life. But, and that's a great moment, kind of like really showing like how you have no real control over the outcome or whatever of this story. But after that moment, it just kind of downhills for me. Like, now we just gotta listen to Frank Fontaine go like, oh man, kid, I've been planning this for years. I want to rule over Rapture. I'm gonna be Rapture's new king. I'm Frank Fontaine. I was Atlas all along. And you're like, okay, I really don't care. And I really think why people really remember the story fondly for this game is for the would you kindly moment and the little glimpses into the past through audio logs. And you can be like, well, those audio logs are important to the main story. Not really. You could play the whole game without ever listening to one. Outside of like this short little quest ones you have to listen to find certain items or key information you need to give to someone. But yeah, you can go the whole game without really listening to these audio logs and not really... Like, you kind of still get a picture of what Rapture was just through this environment and the few odd comments from splicers. Overall, the story isn't bad, but it's not an amazing masterpiece like people act like it is. Like, I have really nothing else to add to this. I don't hate the story. I think for the time, games were really kind of lacking in story elements, so that was a nice little twist that people weren't expecting, really. Like, would you kindly kind of became an iconic phrase because of the twist, but probably a lot of people didn't even take stock of every moment he said it, because I know even playing through it and me knowing that twist, I didn't take much stock of moments he said it. I just kind of like, oh, you gotta go do this, and like, I guess I gotta go do that. So it was overall an okay story with elements I really like and a backstory that is really good. All in all, Bioshock is a good game. It's not a masterpiece, and it's not an amazing game, but it is a good game. I had a lot of fun playing it. It had gameplay mechanics that I really liked, and amazing level design. Like, my favorite part of the game is the level design. For all of its little flaws, there is a lot of the game to love. And although some of its stuff, combat, is outdated and whatnot, I would recommend that anyone who's never played this game before or has had it on like a backlog to really check this game out. I enjoyed it a lot. I think most people will. And I'm going to have to give Bioshock a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching, guys. This was Big Man, and I hope you have a good one.